Good evening, friends. It is June the 4th, and today I spent some more time going through rereading the prophecies. Every time I do, I find a little bit more. It's a little bit more understanding, a little bit more clarity. And I realized that I haven't gone into on these videos how I came to my own understanding. It's in my book, Diary of Therion, but I haven't laid it out so much in video. So, in the book of Revelation, which is a really complex, complicated set of visions and mystical too, so there's a lot of mysticism, symbols and such, that are also interrelated to other prophetic works. But as on its own, it holds a lot of water, right? So I didn't know this growing up, and I discovered this at the age of 30, that there is a actual key. I kind of figured that there might be, that there's a riddle, because Revelation 13:18, which everyone's familiar with the number 666, well, it's a man's number, and he who hath understanding, calculate it. And most people through the ages, including major occultists, have tried to use numerology, words, every letter having a certain number and adding those numbers up and trying to come up, and it's a lot of hogwash. That on itself means nothing, right? I figured it have to mean something more. And then I realized it's a birthday. The Hebrews use a 360-day year. And gives hints that in other areas of Revelation that's what they're doing, using a 360-day year. And so I multiplied 2/3 times 360, and what I got was August 27th, and I was kind of appalled because that was my birthday, right? But I knew that wasn't nearly enough. Not even close. I mean, there was so many people out there with my birthday, right? Doesn't mean anything. So, I sat on that for a bit, and that's when I started really getting guided. I was guided to discover this book called Mystical Christianity. And in it was an idea that, wait, those stories in the Gospels about Yeshua's birth, well, there's a deeper riddle to all that. They didn't hide it in plain sight, for obvious reasons, right? I mean, it's in plain sight, but they didn't, it's hidden, okay? The story of the virgin birth, and also in Revelation, too, that there's astrology. Now, the Roman Catholic Christians, made a big stink about all of this, using astrology. But they very much at the time did, for important things. The Babylonians and the Zoroastrians. And they recognized that Yeshua was a divinely, was an avatar, essentially, is the way that the Hindus would call it. Was a great one coming at a divinely appointed time. And this occurred shortly after Jupiter and Saturn were in retrograde together. Now, this event doesn't happen very often. In fact, my own research shows that it's only happened 12 times, including Yeshua's own birth, which was between 6 and 7 BC, right? Not 1 AD like people think. And it included a third planet. For my case, that third planet was Venus. And Jupiter, Saturn, Venus were in conjunction on my birthday in the Maiden. After Jupiter and Saturn having been retrograde. So it's a rare event. And by itself, still, I was like, okay, this is really like amazing and significant. But I still need like some way to pinpoint that it's me. I mean, I got no bloodline of any kind to like rest my case on. It has to be a geographical. There has to be something geographical, location-wise. And it took me a while to figure that out. I found the first pieces utilizing basically the symbols. There's also Pluto. Pluto is also up there in Virgo. Using the symbols of those 4 planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and Pluto, they combined. And when I looked at a map, it took me about a month before I realized this, it's on a fucking map. And I was born in that map. I was born in the sickle of Saturn. But still, I was like, okay, that's not enough. You know, there's got to be more. And it wasn't until I wrote my book. And I prayed, and I desperately asked, like, please help me find the missing piece, because I know this isn't enough. And so I did. I found both missing pieces. The beginning of writing it, or getting back to writing it in the year 2022, and as I finished my final drafts, my final chapters, I was given the final piece, the longitude and latitude. And it linked up with Masonic mythology. And I realized, whoa, because it was precisely my birth location, which was 106.6 by 35. So that was pretty amazing. That was the key, you see, to understanding the book of Revelation. Because from there, other things start to pop out. But it wasn't until after I published, that certain events occurred. And a lot of events have occurred since. Big events. I've been doing signs for years now. And so to go into Revelation 13, a beast comes out of the sea. And it shows that later on this beast is the same one that came out from the abyss. Whatever that means, right? What is the abyss? Well, Crowley has some ideas, Enochian stuff, but this beast that comes out and is explained having 7 heads. One that also comes out that is an 8th, that is of the 7th, and goes into destruction. Well, there's some interesting things. So, it took me a little time to comprehend this, looking at the events that are occurring now. So the U.S. presidents, right, the heads, since I've been alive, have been Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and the number 6 is Donald Trump. Number 7 is Joe Biden. of the 8th is Donald Trump again. So that fits. The first beast, which is controlled by the second beast, the beast from the earth, that has 2 horns, but is like a lamb. Now, a lot of you might want to think that's Baphomet and that's a goat head. No, it's a ram. It's just that certain wild animals, undomesticated, were still called beasts. And I've been a beast for a lot of my life and quite unrefined. Up until these last few years, which have drastically changed me. I no longer care for the things I once did. I turned away from it. I repented. I'm not in Babylon mentally. Still physically here. Well, who are the 10 horns of this first beast? Well, that would be like the billionaires running the show. The Elon Musk, the MAGA crowd. They don't have a kingdom, but the promised one, right? They don't have sovereignty. That's another way to think of it. So yes, that little key was instrumental in understanding a lot of the rest of Revelation. Now, do I think that I am some of these other things? I don't know. There's a couple big unanswered questions still, and one of them is, who are the witnesses, right? But the word itself can mean I. And if you look at what it's saying in the later parts, that the Lord is saying, I am the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. There's only one first in the story, in this mythos, and that's Adam. And there's only a second, right? That would be Eve. And the word witness kind of means eye, as in eyeball. And that makes me wonder. Because as I said, this thing goes back prior to Hebrewism. Now, these are stories tacked on to an incarnation cycle, a very long, and I would love to understand it better about where we came from, but it's very long. 1,000 years, 2,000 years is not very much. You might think it is because of how many people, but it's not. It's really not. Of those that go into destruction, what does it say about the first beast with 7 heads? Well, it says that beast is, and I'm assuming this is Trump and his cohorts at this point, that beast is captured. So that's why I've been kind of like, I watch friends and stuff who are still into this politics, and I'm like, oh man, don't you see the trap? Don't you see it's already taken care of? He knows he only has a short time. So let's go into those traps. Well, the first one was pharmakia. And that was the gene therapy experiment. That was, and I'll say this again, I studied molecular biology in college. I was disillusioned and came out pretty angry at what I saw. but I have enough knowledge of these technologies, including that which didn't even exist. CRISPR didn't exist yet. To know it's a really, really bad idea. Okay, so the test was: do you fear death? Do you, have more allegiance to God, or do you have more allegiance to these fictional entities that have been programmed into your brain that you think is government, but it only exists in your head? That's why it's on your forehead, right? Although foreface can actually mean mask too. But that's a different part of it. So that was the first test. The second test, and many of you failed the first, but if you repented, you still had, the possibility. To repent means to turn away. If you understood, if you were harmed by those things and you repented and you turned away and refused and became vocal, that's one thing. You didn't exactly pass the test, but you learned. The second test has everything to do with this allegiance. Allegiance to politics. Allegiance to what I said, this fictional entity that only exists in the minds of people, even if people are getting paid paychecks. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't actually exist. It's a construct. Just like that first beast is a construct. It's a way of describing it, but government doesn't actually exist. And if your allegiance is to government, to flags, and you're still caught up in this thought process that they want you to think in terms of, then you're failing the test. And you have almost no more time left to turn away from it. But if you're watching this, you're probably not part of that crowd. So those are the two tests. And if you're marked, you're going to destruction. You don't get to be part of the first resurrection or any of that stuff. So yeah, there's that. It's amazing that I'm coming full circle, like from where I went in my life. I mean, I absolutely. Let's talk about this. The false prophet. I am still trying to understand who the false prophet actually represents. There's a couple really big potential. First is the Roman Catholic Church. Obviously, they're false prophets. I mean, they turned all of this stuff against me and against you. I mean, they turned Yeshua's message and inverted it. They used Saul and Council of Nicaea, and they did all this corrupt stuff, right? Obviously, false prophet. But you could also say they're maybe the Great Babylon, too. The religion I was born into and raised, and as a Jehovah's Witness, obviously false prophet. They cannot even change their initial, and there's no honesty at all from them. At all. Right? They will not admit that they were wrong. I mean, obviously.